on this computer. All right, I think we're ready to go. Let me share the screen here. All right, let's have a word of prayer and we'll get underway. Thank you, Father, for the privilege of studying a little bit more about time, at least as we see it in Scripture, and then moving on to the area of communication. And these are both really, really important to who we are in Christ and how we represent Him on the earth. And I just pray that you would be greatly honored as we share together in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. So let me just throw a few things up here. I think we're at number 4, right? We ended with wristwatch. Was that the last thing we filled in? Okay. So time in the Bible. And these are two very, very important words that are both translated by the same English word. And anytime you do that, you end up losing something from the original language. And any of you who have learned a second language understand how that works. And so the words are chronos and kairos. Chronos should be easy to remember. It's related to our word chronology, which has to do with actual time, seconds, minutes, hours, and so on. Kairos is a word that really means more of an opportunity, taking advantage of a situation, okay? It involves time, obviously, okay? But the sense of the word is more capturing the opportunity than it is using up minutes and hours, so forth, okay? So letter A, chronos refers to time segments. Let's put it that way, time segments. And kairos, letter B, refers to time as opportunity, the right time. And I'm going to show you some passages of Scripture. You have a few listed there, but I'm going to run through some of those on the screen, okay? So let's take a look. Colossians 4:5. Be wise in the way you act toward the outsiders, making most of every kairos, every opportunity, right? Paul's not talking about a certain amount of time, but an opportunity. Same thing in Ephesians 5. Be careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making most of every kairos, opportunity, because the days are evil. Right? Now, here's an example of the word chronos, okay? And this actually has to do with time segments or sequence. But when the fullness of time had come. And here, the author is looking over the entirety of the human race. He's seeing it in a linear time fashion, and he's looking at this chart, this continuum of time, and he says, at the exact moment, when everything was exactly as it should be in the world, at that point in time, God sent his son. That's definitely chronos. So is the passing of time important to the Bible writers? Absolutely. It just depends on what you're talking about, okay? And that's very important. God situated everything in the world exactly as it was to be at that moment when Christ came. Okay? John 9, as long as this day we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. Now you don't see either one of those words there, chronos or kairos, but which of those two do you think is really dominant in this statement? Yeah, and why do you say that? Right, he's not thinking about a 12-hour night or a 12-hour day. Obviously, he's talking about taking advantage of the time that we have it now. So kairos, or the opportunity, is the idea there. Do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring forth. Chronos or kairos? It's probably the same, kairos. Again, he does mention a day, but he's not thinking in terms of what's going to happen in the next 24 hours. He's thinking more about when you look ahead, you're making plans, you want to take advantage of, what's coming, but you don't know what a day may bring forth, what opportunities, challenges might be there. So it's really more the kairos kind of time. Teach us to number our days, same thing, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Numbering days may sound like chronology, but again, when I say, you need to number your days, what am I really telling you to count 24, 48, 72? No, I'm telling you to take full advantage of the opportunities that God's given you, okay? Do not forget this one thing, dear friends, with the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day. Now there you have chronos idea, okay, because it's comparing man's concept of duration with God's concept of duration. It's very different for God, okay? So we have to, time's up for that subject. We got to move on to the next one. Down at the bottom, though, of your sheet, let me just give you the rest of what's on the paper. Sometimes in class, I'll do a little exercise with the students and just ask them, you know, where they would plot themselves on the scale. So we don't have time really to go around the room and ask everybody, but just looking at that scale, kind of ask yourself, where would I end up on that? And I'm guessing that probably most of you are going to say, well, it kind of depends. You know, if I'm doing something I really like, I lose track of time, I don't care. But there are other times when I'm very conscious of exactly what time it is, right? So it's a little bit hard, but you know, just in general, the way that you see yourself, where would you plot yourself on there? But you can just think about that. Then 2 closing thoughts. Time-oriented people should strive to build in time flexibility. If you're a very clock-oriented person and you're interacting with people, try, even though it's difficult, to be flexible, okay? Letter B, event-oriented people, which are not most of us by nature, should seek to understand the consequences of missed deadlines. So there's a balance there. People live in cultures that don't pay as close attention to the clock. You need to understand that there are consequences for, you know, missing deadlines or things like that. As I said the other day, all cultures possess elements of both. All right, can we move on? Do you have any questions or comments about time before we move on to the next one? Anything at all? All righty. Well, let's talk about communication. Very important, direct versus indirect. So what does this mean? What are we trying to illustrate here? Okay, all right, all right. One looks pretty messy, doesn't it? The other one looks nice and clean. Okay, let me just take a little poll here again, a little straw vote. How many of you, when you're in a conversation, in general, again, there are going to be exceptions, but in general, when you're in a conversation, you like to cut to the chase, cut out the fat, get to the point, and say it. You're more that kind of a person. Okay. So are the others, or maybe you're still thinking about it, but are some of you others the kind that you don't mind taking time to get to the point? You like all the extra stuff, the little fixins and extra rabbit trails that are part of a conversation in general? Do you enjoy that? You're okay with that? You like that? Yeah? Yeah. So which one's right and which one's wrong? Bad question, right? Now, I know sometimes it depends on what you're talking about. Look, when you're doing your senior orals, let me just give you a little hint. Do not answer questions like this, because the guys that are questioning you in your orals are going to look for things that you're saying here and here and here to ask further questions. So when you're doing your senior orals, do this, no matter how you're wired, because the shorter your answer, the less baggage you're giving them to ask you further questions. Yeah, so it does depend somewhat on, you know, the situation that you're in. Okay, so let's talk about this. Of course, what we're dealing with is what we call direct, and again, there are 2 designations that we can use: direct or low context communication, and indirect or high context communication. So number 1 on your notes there, another way of saying it: low context versus high context communication. All right, this part is easy: direct and indirect. That makes all kinds of sense to us. Do you understand what we mean when we use the terms low context or high context communication? It'd be the information given in the conversation. Okay, I see where you're going with that. That may be true in part, but that's not specifically what's meant by this. You're right. It makes what you're saying makes perfect sense. But there's a different sense in which we're using the word context here. High and low context. Yeah. We're talking about, when we use the word context here, we're talking about what is not said. And body language is one of those things. It may be body language, it may be the way the room is arranged, it may be how much lighting we have, it may be the time of day. Think of all the things that influence a conversation that are not verbally spoken. That's what we mean by context. So, low context communication has to be more direct. Why? Okay, you say you're not focused on the extra things, but or let's say maybe there aren't as many extra things, period. The less you have of other things to fill out the communication process, the more direct you have to be when you're talking. But the more, go ahead, Liz. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, there's context in every conversation. In, like I said, even my body language, the way I'm dressed, the way the tables are arranged, everything here is somehow contributing to the conversation. Some things very little, other things a lot more. Even the volume of my voice will have something to do with it. Okay. Um, so when you don't have a lot of extra context, extra things that can help you communicate, you have to be more specific, more direct, more to the point. Whereas when you have a lot of context, other things are communicating, like body language and volume and the situation. You can be more indirect. Let me give you. I gave this example in Intro to Missions. If I walk home and open the door and I walk in and my wife says to me, "So how was your day today?" I say, "Fine," and I walk into the room. You know, did I just say "fine" to her? No, there's a whole lot more that I said, right? The tone of my voice, the fact that I just made a one-word response, the fact that I walked into the room without looking at her, without giving her a hug and a kiss, all of that is contextual communication. It's nonverbal, but it communicates. And so I could be very, very indirect with her. When I say fine, I didn't give her a specific answer at all, but I did. What did I tell her? It was not a good day. It wasn't fine, right? It's amazing how often we will use a word to communicate just the opposite in the way that you say it. So the word fine says to her, not fine, because of all, she knows me. And there are lots of things that we can say to each other without even, you know, if I walk, she says, "Love you, honey," I say, "Love you too," and I walk away, you know, same thing. So context has to do with the nonverbal aspects that influence what you have to say in order to make your message clear. Think of a small child. How specific you have to be with a very small child when you're giving instructions, okay? But as that child grows and your relationship develops, okay, all you have to do, if the child's about ready to do something, all you have to do is go like this. The child says, "Oh yeah, I get it." You don't have to say anything, right? You don't have to do anything except, and they got it. Okay, that's high context, right? Do you understand what I'm saying? Any questions about that, comments? This is very, very important as a foundational part of this discussion. Okay. All right. try to this afternoon or this evening when you're engaging with other people, if you think of it, try to detect elements of verbal and nonverbal communication that are going on in your interaction with people. And I think you'll be amazed at how much there really is, okay? And that's, by the way, that's one reason why even dress codes are important. How do we know if we should be casual or business formal or whatever? How do we know that? Well, because the way you dress is a nonverbal communication that's going to set the pace for whatever you're doing. In some cases, it may speak more loudly than in other cases. All right, well, let's move on. This is subject to scrutiny and error. You can go online and find all kinds of charts like this about all the values that we're talking about. David, did you notice that I didn't do this, okay? I found this online. Germany is considered way over on the low context side. Would you agree with that? That's a good answer. Yeah. So you need to be very specific. It's like the lady at the hotel we talked about that said, what time? You're gonna come to clean your room. Chinese are considered very high context. Again, China's all over the map on this because there's a lot of capitalistic influence in China and stuff. Yeah. You agree with this? You think Americans, by and large, are more high context in their communication? You put them. Oh! So what high context communication did I just say to you? You can't read. He's stupid. Actually, I can't read sideways. Try to get out of this somehow. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, America. It's funny because when I looked at that, I thought, I don't remember Americans being over there. But I guess I just, between last year and this year, I forget. Yeah, okay. Thank you for correcting me. All right, moving right along. Let's fill in some things here. Communication, okay. First of all, number 2 is not on the screen here. Let me give that to you. A few examples, high context or indirect, Liberia and Japan. Very, very high context, which means they depend a lot on nonverbal cues. That's a key word, cues, that you get, hints. When you walk into a restaurant, you subconsciously look around and ask yourself, is this a nice place to eat? You may not say that to yourself, but you're thinking it. So what are you doing? You're allowing the nonverbal communication of that restaurant to tell you whether you should eat here or go someplace else, right? You walk in, you look around, and you see dirt, and dust, or tables crowded together. You might be tempted to think, okay, that's what we're getting at. It's going on all the time. All right, so letter B, low context, or more direct, is the US and the Netherlands. Again, give me some things that we say in America that communicate the idea of low context, more direct communication. What are some expressions we use? Yeah, don't beat around the bush. What's another way of saying that? Get to the point. What's another one? Give it to me straight up. All right. Now, what happens if I don't? If I beat around the bush, I don't get to the point, I don't give it to you straight up, what is your tendency to think about me? I don't mean me, Mark Lowndes, I just mean me as a person. Yeah, what's he trying to hide? Yeah, he's trying to avoid that as much as possible. So all this other stuff here is viewed as avoiding the subject. What else might you think? I like to talk a lot. And you'd be right if you're talking about me. I do like to talk. People say, the women talk more. That's very unjust. In our home, I'm the gabber. My wife is much more controlled. What else might you think? I'm not very confident. I'm not sure what to say. I'm kind of over here, then I'm back here. I'm insecure, right? Hopefully, eventually, I'll get to what I really need to say. And any one of those could be right in a given situation, but they are definitely stereotypical things that you need to avoid. Yeah, don't just assume that. Yep. If I am going to come over here to talk to you, and and I start engaging, and I look at, he's looking right in the eye at me. Okay, now the reason that we can talk like this, and you can look at me in the eye, is because we know each other pretty well. We even dressed the same last week, right? Yeah, and so there's no problem. But if I go to somebody I don't know very well, and I start doing this, there's a tendency to retract a little bit, look down, look away. So how long is he going to be standing here? When's he going to go back to the podium? See, all of those are nonverbal forms of communication. All right. So, U.S. and the Netherlands are both considered very, very low on the. And again, depending on what chart you get online, you'll see differences of opinion. Okay, so there's the first blank. You probably already filled it in. We're going to compare some characteristics. Low context communication is explicit and direct. Now, as a student at Faith, when you're studying for a test, what kind of communication do you like? Yeah, just tell me what's going to be on the test, for crying out loud. But no, we professors like to embellish our classes, so we give you lots of other goodies. And you're sitting there thinking, I don't want those goodies. I just want to pass this test and be on to something else, right? Every prof tries to convince you that his classes are the greatest classes on earth, right? By the way, if you become a teacher someday, I encourage you to teach that way. Believe that what you have to say is really good for people to hear, and that they want to hear it, and that they want all the extra bells and whistles that go along with it, even though you know they don't. All right. So did I just tell you to be a fake as a teacher? No, I didn't. Number one, people say what they mean. That's the next blank there. People say what they mean. Two, they get to the point or give it to you straight up. All right? I guess I forgot it. Wait a second. Oh, okay. I know what I did. I made a change in my PowerPoint last year. I'm giving you the main points first for each one of those bracketed areas. So in the first bracket area, A, communication is explicit and direct. That next one goes with letter C, the next low context statement. You get it? Yeah, sorry about that. And one of these days I should change that in the notes as well, but yeah, I'm just dealing with one at a time. So the next, actually in your notes would be letter C. Low context, the meeting place is based more on convenience. Appearance is of little importance, and the word there is objective. So if somebody comes up and say, we're having board meetings and therefore you can't meet in this room next week, what do we say? Go to the Student Center, come to my, well, you can't come to my office, too many of you. Let's go to a coffee shop. That'd be cool. I do that once in a while at the end of the semester. This class is probably a little big for that, especially if I'm footing the bill. But what do? We're practical. We're very practical because low context communication, direct communication tends to be very practical. Let's find something that works. As long as it works, we're good. How did we get through COVID and Zoom, a year ago so well? Part of it's because that's the way we're geared. Now, if you're in a high context culture where the room, the atmosphere is very important, you're going to really, really struggle with what we did last semester or a year ago. Going home and all of a sudden transitioning from this to online, see? And so that's not a strength or a weakness, it's a difference between the two approaches. And then skipping down to letter E, when there's misunderstanding, the communicator has failed. Explicit meanings are important. You ever hear somebody say, if the student hasn't learned, finish it. If the student hasn't learned, you haven't taught. Exactly. So the responsibility in direct communication culture is on you. If you guys don't learn this stuff, it's my fault. And I hate, that's really dangerous just to say that, because now you can all flunk and say it's the professor's fault. Yeah, let's get indirect here. But that's true. The onus of responsibility is on my shoulders. I've got to make sure you get it. And if you're not getting it, I need to rephrase it. I need to do something to make sure you get it. All right? That's direct. And then letter G, down there, low context, there's an emphasis on clarification. Signage, directions. So, great example of direct communication, low context, is our interstate system. Think of all the signs, you know? It doesn't just say, you know, lane ends. It says lane ends in half mile, lane ends in a quarter mile, and then they give you some other, you know, indications, lane ends. You have all sorts of clues to watch. Would you say the international airports are largely high or low context? International airport. Forget Honolulu, right? It does to some degree, but in general, international airports especially airports where lots of Westerners, because Westerners are 80% of the traveling international travelers. Most airports are very low context atmospheres. Signage is very good. There's a lot of stuff. Not everywhere. Okay, every rule has its exception. But in general, they are, because they're appealing by and large to a Western culture. All right. Now the other side, letter B, back up to B up there. Communication is highly dependent on picking up cues from the text. Letter C, or let's see, what are we, D now. Okay, the meeting place is based on what will communicate to the other party. Appearance is very important. Give me an example in America of an event or activity where the location is extremely important. Pardon? Yeah, I'm supposed to be going to a wedding Saturday. It's going to be like the coldest day of the decade. Huh? Yeah, you know, you're right. Yeah, the weather. Yeah, still it's going to be cold. Yeah, a wedding. What else? Well, let me ask you this. Thinking about the wedding. Who's the most important person in the wedding? Come on, ladies. Okay. Gentlemen, we just have to swallow our pride, right? Okay. The ladies are very important. So if the lady is the most important thing, then why are we so worried about what everything else looks like in the room? We want to focus on her, right? So why worry about everything else? Yeah, everything else serves to embellish her. Now, it's not just her, I understand, it's the couple and all that. Yeah, and if you ever perform weddings, gentlemen, just write it down, you know, accept it. You really don't care. I mean, you really don't matter. Except, you know, you need to get your part done, okay? Please don't do what a colleague of mine who's now with the Lord did in Brazil. When he did Brazilian weddings, they were 45-minute messages. His messages were typically 45, and he took great pride in that. So, yeah, but what the entire location, everything, all the decorations, everything, the lighting, it's all intended to embellish the bride. Okay. Now, why don't we do that in the classroom, for example? Why don't we decorate everything really cool and Well, it's a complex question, right? Um, but think about that. When you're attending an event of some sort, notice what role does the place play? The way it's set up, the way it's decorated, that'll tell you a lot about the nature of the event and what they're trying to accomplish. All right, next one. When there is misunderstanding, the listener has failed to pick up on the cues. Excuse me, that's not supposed to be cures. That's supposed to be cues. I'll have to fix that. In fact, if you'll excuse me, I'll fix that right now. Because guess who won't remember to do it afterwards? All right. Huh. That's weird. It's not letting me fix it. All right. I don't know what's going on. So, I teach. Okay, there's some. Is this nonverbal communication going on here, or was something actually said? I'm just kidding. I teach, you don't learn, you flunked the class, whose fault is it? Yours. Now you might say as a Westerner, but you didn't explain it right. Okay, but if you're in a high context culture, which is 2/3 of the world, and the teacher says something you don't understand, how do you get your information? We already talked about this in another class. Where do you get your info? How do you figure out, how do you understand it? Do you come to the teacher and ask? No, that's a high power distance thing where to ask the teacher is to imply that he didn't do a good job explaining it, or she. So how do you get your information? Yeah, you go to one of the students. You go to one of the students that always gets A's and say, what do you mean by that? I didn't get that. Okay. Yeah. So here at Faith, whose fault is it in the end? You don't get it, your fault or mine? You don't want to answer that question, do you? And if I were sitting where you were, I wouldn't answer it either. Actually, it's somewhat of a shared thing. Sometimes there is legitimacy in saying the prof just really didn't do a good job of handing that stuff over. But other times they're saying, I was just tired that day. I didn't feel good. My mind was on work or something else, and I didn't get it. Okay, so there's no such thing as a pure culture, as we've said so many times. All right, then finally, it's harder to get around and directions are hard to follow. Directions tend to be very nebulous. We talked about it before. Yeah, go down there. There's a palm tree down a ways. You're gonna turn that away, and you go down. There's a bar on the corner, and then, because they're expecting you to figure it out. Okay, so anyway, those are some basic differences between high and low context communication. Yes, Liz. Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, the little subpoint number 1, there's people don't say what they mean, partly to maintain, and what's the god of collectivistic cultures? What's social harmony, right? If social harmony is most important, then I may avoid saying something, especially in a direct fashion, not because I'm trying to hide something or because I'm embarrassed, but because I don't want to cause you to lose face. So, you may not come to me afterwards. Imagine one of you come to me after and say, Mr. Lounsborough, that was a terrible class. You didn't explain anything. I'm totally confused. You blew it that day in class. Now, you're probably not going to do that. Okay. If you do, we'll go for coffee and talk about it. Wait a minute. I just set myself up if you like coffee. You may come to me and say, Mr. Lounsborough, I was just having a little trouble in class today. You made this statement, and I wasn't sure I was really following you. Now, you're really telling me the same thing in both cases, but the way that you tell me is totally different. Why? Because in the second case, you want to respect me and maintain that respect, professor and student, in the way you talk. So we do practice that kind of communication, you know, in our culture. In some, think about parents and children. If children, there are families where the children, a 10-year-old child can just read his parents a riot act as if they're right there, they're equals. You know, and there are other homes, you know, where there's a definite understanding. Again, this is tied to power distance. I understand that, but remember that all of these value systems go together. They're all weaved together in some way. Okay? All right, did I leave out any other little points there? Okay. Yeah, I thought this was pretty cool. I think it communicates pretty much the same thing. Yeah. Did I miss another one? You know, I just do that because I like to hear you guys talk. So if one way to get you to talk is to skip my points in the notes. Number 2, people rely on the cultural context to provide meaning. In fact, the context is just as important as the event itself. All right. Thank you, Liz. I appreciate you keeping me halfway sane. All right. Anyway, I enjoyed that. I thought that was a good way of illustrating it. Oh, let me ask you this. Just go back. When you first meet somebody, you're total strangers. As the two of you get to know each other, is the tendency to become more direct or indirect in your communication? Why? Is that direct or indirect? You get to know each other, you know how each other thinks. Is that high or low context? That's higher context. So doesn't that mean more indirect? Doesn't but several of you said direct. The more you get to know each other, the more direct your communication becomes. So which is it? Okay. Okay. You can actually see shades of both of them, can't you? There's a sense in which, and I actually kind of expected you to say direct, because you know each other well enough, you can tell like it is. In Brazil, they would be very indirect when they were talking to me, but when they're talking to their fellow Brazilians, man, just bam, 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 right? Just let them have it. No beating around the bush, okay? So there is a sense in which you can be more direct. But the thing is, when you become close as friends, you don't need that direct communication for the most part. When you look at the bigger picture of your relationship, because you know how each other thinks. And so you can word things in such a way that preserves the friendship, but still very much gets the point across without saying the actual words. Yeah, yeah. There's an interesting play between both of those, and that's something else to kind of look for. Yeah, very interesting. All right. Did we get all those? All right, let's move on. Yeah, pantomime. Anybody enjoy doing pantomimes? No. Well, there's some games out there. Give me the name of one of those group games that uses pantomimes. Yeah, charades, and then some popular ones that have come out in recent years. Well, no, that's, yeah, we play that all the time. Yeah, I love that game. It's a lot of fun. That's a good way to learn to, that's more of a body language thing. This is limited really more to the body language, you know, thing, but just remember that nonverbal communication goes far beyond just physical, you know, body movements, okay? It's everything else. All right. So let me see where we are here. Okay, let's go ahead and fill in number 4 at the bottom. In any culture, certain groups are high context. Okay, so let's take Germany, which is way down there on the low context list, David, right? Even in Germany, what subgroups will be high context? What's the one unit in any society that's going to be high context? Collectivistic also? Family, exactly. The first blank there is the family. And that'll vary somewhat, but in any culture, comparatively speaking, the family is going to be high context, just because you know each other so well, okay? Another one, religion. I don't know if somebody from South Germany goes to North Germany, they may have trouble getting some of the cues. I don't know how different the Lutheran and Catholic churches are in Germany. I'm assuming there's quite a, yeah. So religion also, and we talked about this before, when you walk into your church, you don't have to stop and think, how do I act, what I do? You're used to being there and you become familiar with it. So there's a lot of nonverbal communication that goes on. And then your profession, where you work, and again, we mentioned this before as well. You walk into the workplace, you know what the expectations are, people communicate in a certain way. I've talked to people in the medical world who they're just cues that they pick up, nobody else understands, but they work with each other and they've learned to, just the way they look at each other, nod or point or something, they get it. It's like a foreign language. Okay, so who's responsible for getting the message through? We already talked about this. Is it the listener or the speaker? And the answer is yes, depending on what kind of culture you're in. Generally speaking, I would like to say that here at Faith, I think I represent the faculty when I say that we are of the opinion that it's a both and process. I have to be motivated to teach and be clear, but you also have to be motivated to learn. And we believe that you have a special motivation because of the nature of our college, who we are. And therefore, when you come here, you already have a heightened motivation for learning. See, so it's a give and take. It's a shared responsibility. Okay, let's see. Yeah, thinking of whose fault it is. Faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. But I ask, Paul says, and he's talking about the Jews here in Romans, have they not heard? Didn't the Jews hear? Well, yeah, their voice has gone out to all the earth, talking about his revelation. Their words, the ends of the world. So, what is Paul saying? Who's responsible? Israel is. They heard. They're responsible for what they heard. And we understand that they didn't just hear once, but God communicated in so many, many, many ways to his people. General revelation, special revelation in so many forms that Israel had no excuse. Did Israel not understand? First Moses, I will make you jealous of those who are not a nation. Whose responsibility was it to understand in this passage? Obviously, it's Israel's responsibility. God doesn't say, oh, maybe I didn't give them quite enough. Man, I should have said it this way, or I should have showed them that miracle or that sign. No, none of that. So when it comes to God, okay, there's only one excuse for not learning. That's our sin. We can never point to God and say, God, you didn't say it clearly enough. You didn't give it to me, in a way that I could comprehend it. That is the unique situation in communication where there's a one-sided responsibility, and that is ours. Okay? Here's just another fun verbal and nonverbal communication. You ever done that? Put on a good front. Hi. You've all heard the story where you're fighting with somebody. You're losing your cool and the phone rings, right? Hi. How you doing? Oh, I'm great. How are you? You dirty rotten liar. We all do that to some degree. So I thought that was kind of cute. All right. Let me move on. I got some more slides, but let's fill in a little bit more here. Number 5, where does the cultural orientation toward context come from? All right. Don't assume indirect communication is passive-aggressive behavior. It can be. Sometimes you give people the silent treatment, right, because you want to punish them. But don't just assume that when somebody doesn't answer right away, or they're real quiet, it's because they're trying to be passively aggressive. B, neuroscience has made some observations about the role of context. Number one, Westerners enter a room and notice the most important person. We as Westerners, whether you think about it, next time you enter a room, if you're going to some meeting or something, the first thing you're looking for is, who's the guy in charge? You want to know who's the guy in charge here, because that's important. Whereas, letter number two, Easterners will walk into the same room, same meeting, and they will notice the details, how it's set up, how it's organized, even before they'll notice who's in charge. Again, these are, extreme statements, but I'm telling you the tendency. Number six, honesty versus loyalty. Now we're going to talk about the whole issue of honesty in another cultural value later on. But honesty versus loyalty plays a role in communication. Have you ever had to tell somebody you highly respect something that you know is going to offend him or her? A parent, a boss, a professor, a pastor. I mean, that is absolutely hard to do. Because you're struggling between these two, honesty and loyalty. You want to be loyal to his or her authority, but you can't lie. And as a Christian, there are times when you face that. What do you do in a dilemma like that? Which one has to end up trumping the other? Honesty or loyalty? Does position or truth end up becoming more important? What do you think? The pastor is out of order, done something wrong. You know it's wrong. You want to be a loyal sheep and uphold the authority of your pastor, but you also have a responsibility. Which one's going to trump which? Huh? Honesty, truth. Why do you say that? Okay. Truth actually reflects the character of God himself. The temporal position, not so much. And I said that carefully, not so much. It does. Yeah. Paul talked about this in 1 Timothy 5. He said, don't let anybody rebuke an elder except by 2 or 3 witnesses. What is he saying? An elder, a pastor, may need to be rebuked, but there's a way to do it that can still preserve the respect for the office, and that's by making sure that there are at least 2 or 3 witnesses. You handle it very respectfully, okay? But so in different cultures, high versus low context cultures, this is going to, in a very low context culture like ours, it's a lot easier for somebody to stand up at a business meeting and say, Pastor, I disagree with you. And some of you have been at business meetings where that sort of, where you have seen the pastor attacked, or maybe that's the wrong word, but addressed like that. Okay? And in the 2/3 world, that kind of a statement in a business meeting would just be absolutely, I mean, it would take the breath out of their people. Their mouths would drop to the floor. Okay? Does that mean that they'll be dishonest? No, it means that they will find creative ways to communicate the issue with the pastor that doesn't cause him to lose face, at least immediately. It may be that eventually he will have to lose face. He will have to be removed or asked to leave the church. But you wrestle you try to find ways to do it without coming to that, any more directly than necessary. It's fast. Please don't think, if you're in a culture like that these people are tolerating sin. That is not what they're doing. It may, because a lot of times it's a question of time. You say this needs to be dealt with right now, not next week, not next month, right now. Okay? Whereas they might say, yeah, it needs to be dealt with, but let's take this slowly and easily. be careful if you're in a culture like that, that you don't condemn those people and accuse them of being lax or neglectful in dealing with sin, okay? That's one of the biggest tendencies when you're ministering in a very high context culture. Okay? They are dealing with it, but in a different way, at a different speed than you would in the Western world, okay? Good to remember that. Number 6, B, sociolinguists. They say our choice of words and how it reveals that's what sociolinguistics is, rather, our choice of words and how it reveals our cultural orientation. Just fancy word, okay? Socio is society, people. Linguistics is how they talk. So it's the study of how people interact. Double voice discourse. Anybody ever hear that? Okay, what is double voice discourse? Well, it's dual orientation, this is letter C, dual orientation in speech. It's an awareness of self and the one with whom you're communicating. Okay, now don't misunderstand me. I'm not talking about talking out of two sides of your mouth at the same time. We usually use that expression to refer to people who are hypocritical. They'll say one thing to one person, somebody. That's not what we mean by dual orientation or double voice discourse, okay? What it means is when I'm talking to you, I'm aware both of my need to be honest and assume my position, but at the same time, I'm considerate of who you are. And so somewhere in the middle, I'm going to form a sentence that preserves both of those. That's what double voice discourse is. I'm not saying something only from my perspective, who I am, but I'm also considering who you are. Okay? All right. All right, couple of subpoints. For instance, as you know, or you might be wondering, statements like that are more common in the blank there is collaborative cultures. For instance, if I walk here in the classroom, I say, now let me tell you students something. Okay? I'm going to learn you a thing or two today. You know, I'm basically telling you, you're a bunch of dummies, and I'm the guy who's informed. But if I walk in and I say, now, you've probably heard this 100 times, but let me just say, what am I doing? I'm communicating that I believe you already have some knowledge about this subject. Okay? As you well know, and then I'll say it. And you might not even think about that, but I say that because I'm conceding that you're not just a total idiot about the subject. You know something about it, and I'm respecting that. Okay, that's very common in high context cultures. Number 2, academics use this more than businesses due to skepticism. Businesses like to be more straight up because they get really suspicious if people start beating around the bush. But in academics, we often do this to show respect. In faculty meetings, when we have faculty meetings, we are very careful how we discuss subjects. I've not been in a faculty meeting here where somebody raised his hand and gave everybody else the impression that he's the only one that knows anything about the subject. It just doesn't happen here, okay? Hope it doesn't happen in dorm devos either. All right, I have a clip that I want to play for you. Let me finish filling it in. I may come back to it. I may save it for next class. Letter D, being culturally intelligent doesn't mean always acting like the people of the host culture. In other words, if you are a low context person, more direct in your communication, and you go to a country that's very different, that doesn't mean that you have to do a complete flip-flop of who you are. You can maintain who you are, but what you need to do is learn how to nudge more into that culture. Nobody in any culture, I don't think, really expects you to just forget completely who you are. If somebody comes to the United States from China and sets up an apartment, and you walk into their apartment and there's a lot of Chinese decorations, you say, what? This is America, get that stuff off the wall. No, you fully expect that because they're bringing themselves with them on the trip. They don't leave themselves completely behind. So don't feel like God could never use me in a culture like that because I'm too, whatever. No, there's always there's some give and take on both ends of the equation. One of the real parts of one of the arts of learning how to live in another culture is knowing how to cultivate that give and take with the people you're living with. And in some cultures, that's easier than others. Okay, number 7, suggestions. for working with low or high context situations. A, if you're working with somebody in a low context, be clear. Work on being clear if you're not that kind of a person. And two, apologize when you make mistakes. Now, don't do like I did in Brazil, where I'm apologizing so much that they start laughing at me. You know, because Brazilians, if they make a huge mistake, they'll apologize. But other things, incidentals, they just go on with life. That's just the culture there. Whereas I'm much more, oh man, I think I said that wrong. I'm sorry. You know, they're laughing at me. Come on. All right, high context. Phrase things less directly. If you tend to be very direct, polish it up a little bit, you know, sand off the rough edges, and apologize anytime harmony is disrupted. See, if you're in that kind of a culture, if you do something wrong, but it doesn't mess up the social harmony, in their view, there's no reason to apologize. Because social harmony, like we said, is kind of God to them. All right, number 8, in most cultural dimensions, it's equally difficult to cross over, but in the context realm, it's harder for a low context person to move into a high context situation. Studies seem to show that the harder transition is from a low context like we are to a high context. Just because it's easier for us to accuse people being insincere or hiding something, and it's hard both ways, but that one seems to be a little bit more difficult. Now, I'm going to throw some other slides at you, and then if there's time, I will show you the clip. I thought this was interesting, and you don't have to memorize this, but these are all different types of nonverbal communication. Proxemics, okay? David, come here a minute if you would. Yeah. All right. How far is David standing from me? You got size. Yeah. How did David know to stop there and not to?
Social distance.
Yeah, I got news for you. Well before social distance. Fact of the matter is, Americans don't have as much struggle with social distancing as most cultures do, because most cultures are much more this way. Trying to be very. Some cultures would be, if you were in Russia, we might be more like this. Okay, that's what we mean by proxemics. You do that all the time with people. Okay, now we're more aware of it because, thank you, you can sit down. We're more aware of that now because of COVID, right? Everybody, you know, the distancing and all that. But every culture has its own. Mrs. Taylor wouldn't mind me saying this. Mrs. Taylor is from the South, right? And when Mrs. Taylor comes up to talk to you, have you ever noticed she gets pretty close? And she doesn't, she's perfectly normal. You're thinking, you know, because even in our country, there's a difference between the North and the South in terms of proxemics, how far people stand from each other. That's a form of communication. And sometimes you don't realize that you're communicating something to somebody by just something as simple as how far away you are, right? Look at how far you're sitting from each other. You know, how does that happen? Well, it happens because I made you do that, I guess, but that's proxemics. Okay, and there, kinesics has to do, you know, with motions, things you do, and then there's personal appearance, physical environment. Chronemics, well, you know, sensitivity to the time. Vocalics, haptics has to do with actually touching. You ever been around somebody that every time they want to talk to you, they touch you, sitting at the table, and they reach over, and they touch your arm, you know, and they're not being romantic. It's just, you know, sometimes as grandparents do that, honey, let me tell you, you know, and don't honey me, you know, okay? All those are forms of communication. All right, kinesics, vocalics, I'm going to just skip through these because I just basically described them, okay? All right. So, yeah, we already did that. Okay, some verses. Hey, do you remember this one? Elisha, you know, he knows this king. This guy's going to be anointed king, and he knows he's going to kill his successor, and the current king is going to take over. But the guy doesn't want to admit it, so Elisha has a stare down with him. And the guy just gets really awkward, you know? You ever do that? Did your mom or dad ever look at you when you said something? Just keep staring at you because they know that, you know, you're not being for real, and, you know, really? And that stare just starts burning. That's what happened here. using intermediaries is very important in high and low context, especially in high context communication. I don't want to cause you to lose face by being direct with you, okay? You're my boss or, or whatever, my pastor. And so I might invite somebody else to represent me. Now, we Westerners might say, well, you coward, where's your backbone? Now that's not the issue. It's not a lack of courage or backbone. It's respect for I respect you too much to personally, confront you. And I think when Paul said to Timothy, don't confront an elder except with 2 or 3 witnesses, there may be some of this mediation idea involved in it. We're working together. So again, mediation is very common in situations like that. Here in the States, when you think of mediation, you think of court cases with, adoptions or other things like that going on. Luke 17, the centurion heard about Jesus, and he just didn't feel worthy of going to Jesus. So what's he do? He sends to him elders of the Jews, because he just doesn't feel worthy to do it himself. I did not presume to come to you. He said, I'm not worthy to have you come under my roof. So he sends word, just tell Jesus to heal him right from there. See, that's interesting. Who do people say the Son of Man is? Who do you say that I am? What's Jesus doing? He's using Q&A. If you're in a high context culture and it's hard for people to be, direct, questions can be a good way to encourage them to come forth. And you got to be careful. Don't ask just super direct questions. Notice how Jesus did it. What are people out there saying? And he listens to it. How about you guys? He kind of moves in on them that way. And that's a good tool that you can use to help people not feel so on the spot. Look, Jesus uses this parable of the tenants, and what happens? The Pharisees heard that, and they knew he was talking about them. Now, did he mention them? Nope. Did he say the word Pharisees? Nope. How did they know? High context. He knew who they were. They knew who he was. Everybody knew what the Pharisees were in society. So all they had to do was use this simple parable, and they got the point. High context communication, right? Certain moneylender had 2 debtors. There's a parable with a question. See, now he's using both of these tools in the same example. He's telling a parable and he's asking them a question. High context communication. He turns to the woman and he says, Simon, do you see this woman? I entered your house and you gave me no water for my feet. Now he's getting direct all of a sudden, right? He starts with a parable to kind of move in indirectly. But, then Jesus, being who he is, being perfect, understands at what point now he can shift to a direct application of what he's saying. You didn't give me anything, she did. See? So both direct and indirect play a role in this encounter. When Nathan goes to David, what's he do? Tells a story, right? About a man had a lot of sheep, but he instead of offering one of his, he goes and gets the poor neighbor's one little lamb and sacrifices him. Okay, and the thing that's interesting is David doesn't get it. You would think that David would get that story, but he didn't. And Nathan finally has to say, you are the man. Now that's about as straight up as it gets. See, but he begins out of respect, out of the desire to save face, he begins very indirectly. But he has to move into a direct statement when David doesn't seem to be getting it. Okay. When Cephas came to Antioch, Paul says, I opposed him to the face. It's about as direct as it gets. Public, told him like it is, That's Paul. Look, I remember one time hearing somebody here at Faith talking about Paul and saying, I'm not sure Chapley said, I'm not sure I could work with the man. Because Paul is very direct. How do you begin a conversation with a new friend? And this again, is not in your notes, just some talking points. So what do you do for a living? We do that a lot here in our country. We ask people, what do you do for a living? Remember, in other countries, you would ask what? If you're in a very collectivistic culture, you probably wouldn't start by asking somebody what he does for a living. What would you ask him? Pardon? Did you eat already? Yeah. You have something to eat? Let's get a bite. Tell me about your family. Those are less threatening. Yeah, there you go. Tell me about your family. All right. Okay. I'm going to wait until next time. I have a clip about the Narita airport in Japan that illustrates this whole issue of direct and indirect communication very creatively. It's a true story, actually. It was in the news. And we'll get to that on Tuesday next week. All right, but Kara, let's see, both of you, right, are on? All right, good. All right, get the Waltons and the Forests next time around. Thank you. The quest, when is it supposed, yeah, it's supposed to come out tonight, right? Or tomorrow night, what did I say? Right? Which means I'm gonna go back to my office and do it. Okay.